Now, somewhere along the line, in terms of experiential learning, I went to I spoke at a couple of courses in a teacher point of view, which is the experience that you can go through at the University of New Hampshire. And it basically kind of looks at your life. And so what you're hearing today is a little bit maybe some of those lessons learned and some of the leadership aspects in that context, but maybe a little bit modified because I felt it wasn't totally complete. But it's an excellent opportunity to learn about yourself. It's a course that takes about 3 days. And you sit with your peers and you develop this teachable point of view, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It does codify your personal journey over how many years you've had it. Typically, we take people that are sort of at the director, vice president level, so they've been in a company or they've had a work experience for about 15 years or so. It helps you to consciously understand where you've come from, how you've developed, and maybe it may even consciously help you understand what you need as you move towards that journey. And then I would sort of say that it gives you an analytical perspective because a lot of things that happen to you are unconscious. They're not conscious. You may not realize what it did to you, what it gave you at that instant in time, but you will in a further on down backward look from the future. It made me realize the impact of diversity. And I say diversity, like I said, not in a equal opportunity sense, but in the diversity which was represented in terms of your ethnic background and how you think and how you behave. Comes from your military experience, the disciplines, and maybe empathy with the customers. IBM, they always had a sense of corporate values and ethics and honesty. And those kinds of things were absolute givens to work in a company like that. I worked as an expatriate for 10 years, and that gave you a sense of what is the rest of the world like. I found out at one point in time, and I don't know whether this is still true, but over 50% of Americans don't have passports. They've never been anywhere else. They don't know what it's like to live in Iraq. They don't know what it's like in Saudi Arabia. They don't know what it's like in China. And not having traveled, not having seen the rest of the world, you kind of think you're the center of the world. And we found out in the last 5 years, right, that we're not the center of the world. That the world, this is a very global economy and you have to understand people on their terms. So that helped me as an expatriate. L'Oreal was one of the fastest growing companies. There were only 3 layers of management deep. My boss had 57 direct reports, 57 presidents. And he kept it all going because he could connect the dots. So all those kinds of things sort of help. I'm going to talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions, and I'll talk a little bit about BA systems. And I would sort of say it's not always very profound. The things that you're going to hear me talk about today are not terribly profound. But they do make sense in my in my context of what I'd like to at least try to articulate today. So the journey starts off with a concept called high energy and low energy. Low energy being you could have a lot of disappointments and failures, and high energy you can have a lot of successes and a lot of highs. It turns out that you learn from both of those. Okay, so for instance. If you talk about sense of family, I got from my dad a sense of community, and yet I got on this fast track career with IBM, and I didn't see my dad probably for about 8 years at one point, because Hawaii was a long ways away. I lived in New York. It was hard to make the journey. And then after my dad was gone, I kind of realized that in some ways, everything that he gave me in the first 15 years of my life, I became him. His sense of articulation, his sense of caring about other people, his sense of following up. So all those kinds of things. So that was a low part of my life, but I learned from that afterwards with his passing. And to give you a little bit of an interesting war story, the day my dad passed away in Hawaii, which was very, very sudden, I was getting ready to present to the IBM board. I had this project that needed $27 million worth of investment, which is a lot of money in those days. And the president of my division came in and told me, I just got a phone call, your dad passed away. And we would understand if you're not willing to make the presentation to the board. But I had put so much work into it, and I kind of felt that it was an obligation to the people I had. And I knew my dad would want me to follow through. And there wasn't much I could do anyway at 6,000 miles away. So I kind of persevered on. But that was sort of an interesting, sense of how should I feel about the whole thing. And so I just tell you that story because at that defining moment, I had to sort of say to myself, do I give up on the people that are still living? Or do I remember my dad later on because I can't do anything for him? But that's sort of kind of what evolved over my career. And so I'll talk about a couple of highlights. I always wanted to be an Air Force officer. It took me 8 years of ROTC to become an Air Force officer. But it only took me 2 tours in Vietnam to get pretty disillusioned about being in the military because I saw so many of my friends die and get injured, etc. So, there was a high and a low. And the low happened to be that I got out and went into IBM, but I never knew what I was accepting because I just wanted to get out. So I took the decision in terms of circumstance of getting out, but I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't do any research about IBM. I knew very little about IBM when I accepted the job. But they made me a manager in 2 years, and I never practiced engineering after that. So for 33 years, after doing engineering for 2 years, I was on a management track. And I can't remember, but at age 39, I was an IBM vice president running a whole facility. And that was pretty neat. And along the way, I got to do some really interesting things. So how many of you have heard about the F-117 stealth fighter, right? Okay. These are the days when nobody knew about it. And I walked into this facility at Lockheed, and I said to them, I want to build your computing system for your special project. I didn't know what it was. They had sent me a descriptor. I walked into the Lockheed factory, and the guy said, you're too young to really make this kind of commitment for IBM. I want to see your boss. So the next meeting that happened, they took our proposal. We won the processing system, but I had to bring my boss out because they wouldn't take my commitment. I was too young. And the guy who was the general manager at Lockheed said, fine, okay, we're going to give you the contract. I'm going to show you now what we're building. And he walked us out into this building, which was about 1.5 miles long. And there in that building sat about 25 of these stealth fighters in different stages of construction. There were 18,000 people cleared on that program at that time, and the world never knew. It was just a phenomenal experience. We built the whole flight control, weapon control system for that airplane over a period of 5 or 6 years. Really exciting project.